Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Antichrist from 2009. So, I would have to go on, and the best way that I can sell this movie is that there is quite a bit of skin in the game in this film, that there is to be some aggressive love scenarios, let's just say, in this movie. And then, I have to be honest about this film. There were certain things that I liked shot-wise about this movie. There were some slow motion things. I was like, okay, that's a cool thing to like approach in a film. I haven't seen that since like Dread, and so yeah, there was certain just kind of interesting ways of or artistically shooting this movie. But then let's also go on and state that this movie has to fall into the top 5 the weirdest films that I've ever gone and seen. Yeah. Of course, this is to not be number 1 because there are to be movies like Bullets of Justice with Danny Trejo, which is the weirdest thing I've ever gone on and seen in my life. Never went on to review it because I was like, why? Why review it? But it was a car crash. I couldn't look away. And so I was just glued to this bizarre film. But anyways, so let's talk about this movie. So we have both Charlotte and Defoe, who is just to be called he and she. We have a son in this movie who is just to be called Nick. And so we have Charlotte and Defoe that are to be this couple, and in the midst of the throes of passion in the beginning of this film, they end up losing their son while doing it. Which means that we are to have me really need to go on and explain what that actually means. Because that sounds very weird. So, we then go on and have Charlotte, who is to be in grief of loss of her child. And, of course, DeVoe's character, who is a therapist, is to try and want to help his wife and to try and cure her of her anxiety or panic or whichever. So we go on to have Defoe, who is to eventually get to a point where he needs to figure out his wife's greatest fears and find out that fear is to be a thing of the woods. So they make their way to this cabin. They eventually adventure into finding that Charlotte is to almost describe the woods as hell, bizarrely in this film. And so the further and further we go, we realize that there is no way for Charlotte to regain her sanity, it seems. And so we have both these characters who are to go on, and by the end of this film, like, all bets are off. We have Charlotte that goes on and puts a metal rod into Defoe's leg and puts a weight on it, and so Defoe's character is having a difficult time getting around. We then also, the later we get to this film, like, all bets are off. Like, we really go into private territory and have me need to state words like nutcracker and or the weirdest thing to decide to cut off in your life in a film. So with that said, yeah, things get quite strange in this film, but either way, overall I would say that this movie is interesting. I would definitely have to go on and still give it a thumbs up, but it's a weird thumbs up. It's the weirdest thumbs up I've ever given. It's like a cause yeah, I liked how like smart this movie was, even though I probably didn't really understand it at certain points and certain times because I'm not that intelligent. So yeah, with that said, I think it's about that time to just double five this bad boy up. So I think it's about that time again to, of course, go into what is to always be called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this film and go in more in depth. So, in the beginning of the film, we have this couple who is to be in the shower, and then in other portions of the house, even in the next to the washer and dryer. And we come to find that their son Nick is to be seemingly held within this barrier that Nick does go on and is to be able to unlock said barrier and get out of. And then he starts walking his way through the house to eventually find this window, and out he goes, sadly enough. We have the couple who is at this funeral. They are mourning the loss of their son. And all of a sudden, we have Charlotte who collapses. Willem Dafoe doesn't even realize it. He just keeps on walking. And then all of a sudden, he has to go back to his wife and try to help her get back on her feet, so to speak. So, the next thing we see is that both Dafoe and Charlotte are in this hospital, and it seems that Charlotte has been in this hospital for a month. And we come to find that they're talking about the Dr. Wayne, and we would, of course, have Dafoe, who is stating to Charlotte, it's like, well, hey, like, I've seen 10 times the amount of patients that this doctor has, and I think he's giving you too much medication. Like, I don't think that this is right. And so Charlotte's telling Dafoe, it's like, well, yeah, just because you've had a lot more experience in this kind of field, and like, because Dafoe, of course, is a therapist. So Dafoe is like, well, yeah, that's what I kind of pride myself on, and specifically these kind of scenarios. So this leads to them just kind of having this bickering moment, which then has them make their way back home, and we go on to have Charlotte, who is taking her medication and dumping it down the toilet, doing a little flush. So we just continue to have aggressive and just crazed behavior coming from Charlotte, to where she is having trouble breathing, and so Dafoe would have to go on and scramble, and it's like, okay, like, I'm gonna have to, like, reteach you how to breathe. And so Dafoe would go on and take his wife and just be like, okay, like, you need to inhale and then hold your breath and then exhale, and just keep doing that 5 seconds and then inhale, exhale. And yeah, so we would further and further on, while she's having these panic attacks and anxiety and all of that, going through the stages of griefs and whichever's. So we would have, of course, this moment where Charlotte has made her way to the restroom, the bathroom, and is to go on and be drinking this water, and it seems like she's choking on it. And then when she would go to the toilet to possibly vomit, instead of going on and doing vomiting, she would be doing some headbanging. She would be taking her forehead, just banging it on the toilet, to have all of a sudden Dafoe be awoken by some headbanging. And so he would run to the bathroom and just be like, oh my god, like, honey, you're bleeding. And so Dafoe would try to rush her to bed, which immediately would then go on and have Charlotte, who is to be, like, tossing down Dafoe's underwear, to have them go into this passionate moment between the two of them, which, of course, Dafoe regretted. Because Dafoe was to try to restrain from being with Charlotte, because, of course, he's to try and treat her, and so trying to sleep with her also is a very toxic mix of things. So but Charlotte would just be grabbing on Defoe, and he would just be uh trying to get away, try to like gently just try to like push away from his own wife, because it was to be the gentleman thing to do. So we then would have Defoe, who's like, okay, I need to know what your greatest fear is, and hopefully it's not bears. And so we would go on to have Charlotte, who's like, well, I don't think I have a definitive like fear. And so Defoe was like, well, okay, like, well, where would be a place that you would be the most afraid of going? Maybe we could work on that. So we would have Charlotte that is like, well, I'm most afraid in the woods. And Defoe was like, really? Like, you always want to go into the woods. Like, it just seems like a very odd, like, thing. So that leads Defoe to like, okay, then we're gonna go in the woods. All right, that seems like a thing we can go on and do. So the two of them are to make their way to this train, and Defoe is to try to do this kind of like, I don't know if it's like a hypnotizing kind of exercise or what it is, but so Defoe goes on and has Charlotte visualize that she is to be in the woods. And so it's like, okay, what do you imagine? So Charlotte goes on and is to talk about her being on this bridge. And then Defoe's like, okay, let's continue on with this. So Defoe goes on to eventually have Charlotte go and lay onto the grass and become the woods. And he goes on and eventually tells her about like, well, if you can believe it, you can achieve it, and this and that at some point. So they go on and they make their way to this cabin, to this area, to this woods. And when they're kind of backpacking their way to this place, we have at the point where Charlotte is to be at this bridge, and immediately she runs away. And we would of course have Defoe who's like, well, hey, you can't just run with this, run away from this, you have to face it. So when Charlotte is to run her way into the cabin after Defoe has kind of really looked around and she's like, we even have at one point where Charlotte is to even tell Defoe's character, it's like, yeah, you don't even care about your son being dead. And Defoe's like, how can you really just say that? And plus, like, Defoe really has to go on and be strong for his wife instead of just being weak. And plus, also, like, with the kind of the career that he's gone on and had to have been a therapist, like, I'm sure, like, he is to know all, like, the signs of whatever that he needs to kind of work on to, of course, get past this grief. So we have Defoe that goes on to have Charlotte go outside and like walk in between these two rocks. Plops one rock down, one other rock down, and a pretty good distance, like, hey, like, let's do this first. So Defoe goes on to have Charlotte like jump on his back, and then he like piggybacks her to this rock. She's like, I don't know if I could do it. So they go on and they do this whole thing together, and they go from one rock to the other, and like Defoe's like man, like, you're doing beautifully, like, you're doing it, you're accomplishing and achieving and believing and whichever. So we have the two of them, and we just continue to go on here to have at certain points where this couple is to see some unusual animal things, so we have to get to certain numbers of those. So we have at one point where Defoe is out in the woods and is to see a deer, and we come to find that this deer has a very unusual thing coming out the back of it, and that's what they did as a slow motion thing. And I am just like, okay, I really didn't need to go on and see that. The thing that is to be coming from out of the back steer, it seems to be another deer of sorts. That, no. Then we also go on to have at one point where Defoe is making his way in the woods and is to kind of see this like animal, and it kind of reaches out for it, and then the animal kind of springs out. It's this wolf that seems to be dead, and the wolf is going on and speaking to Defoe. I'm like, okay, that's some usual stuff there. And we also had this bird that is picking out this this thing. I think it's like a baby little bird, and like it's grabbing it, eating it. Sadly enough, moving on. So we need to get past all these moments that I've just kind of quickly ran over. So when they go to the woods and they're trying to figure out like what could be like the thing that of course Charlotte is to fear the most, she further and further talks to have possibly Defoe realizing it's, well, hey, like if she's calling the woods pretty close to hell, and she would call like the woods Eden, and so maybe like Charlotte is to be afraid of Satan. Like maybe that seems like I'll put Satan down as the thing that she fears. And then we go on and get later and later in the film, and Charlotte goes on and just becomes much more and more aggressive, to the point of while they are doing it, Charlotte is to desperately want Defoe to slap her. Defoe's like, I can't do that because I love you. And Charlotte goes like, well, hey, like, if you don't do it, then obviously you don't love me. And then Defoe's like, well, maybe I don't love you then, because I don't think I can do that. So we have Charlotte that leaves Defoe, goes out in the woods to give herself some pleasure. And so then that leads Defoe then to go out in the woods and just give his wife what she wants, and just starts doing some slapping. We have them go back into the house at some point, and we realize that like acorns consistently keep like smacking against this house. And Defoe at one point is to leave this window open, and he leaves this like hand in the window, and like he pulls his hand back out at one morning and it's realized like there's a bunch of like just ticks or whatever on his hand, so he removes all of them. So we further get into this film, and Charlotte is going on and talking about the three beggars, and Defoe is like, well, I don't quite get what you mean about that. And it seems that there is to be a consolation that they're possibly trying to connect this with, like some kind of astronautical signal or whatever. The three beggars. So Defoe is trying to go on and figure that out. And here's where things start to get really off the rails. So while again they're at this aggressive moment of lovemaking, we then go on to have Charlotte, and here's where Defoe starts to realize that the thing that his wife has to fear the most is herself, or is to really just be Defoe. So, yeah, he's basically effed here. He's effed, and not in a good way. So, we have Charlotte that while the two of them are going into this lovemaking session, that is, of course, when finally Charlotte grabs this rock and hits Defoe in the nuts. Nutcracker moment. And so, like, Defoe is out cold. And so, we then go on to have Charlotte, who is to take Defoe's manhood and just continue to just jerk away, to have us realize that there is to not be a certain kind of cream of sorts, as per usual, that is to be coming out of a certain area. What a visual. In this film. And then we then go on to have Charlotte, who is to then put the rod and the weight upon Defoe's leg, screwing it in by having this like huge corkscrew of a thing going through Defoe's leg, then putting the metal rod, then putting the weight, and then tightening it together. So we have Charlotte that goes on to do that, and we have at some point where Defoe is to try and get away from his wife, and he has to kind of just drag his body into the forest. And so Charlotte is scrambling to be like, well, I thought you were here to help me. And she's screaming all of this nonsense and like, where are you? So we have Defoe that makes his way into this hole because he realizes that there's his wife coming soon. So he goes in this hole, and while he's in this hole, he realizes that there is this bird there that is making this sound. So Defoe has to, sadly enough, crush the bird to stop it from making noises. And that is, of course, when Charlotte realizes that Defoe is in that area. And so she tries to take this, like, shovel and, like, kind of, like, bat his legs. And Defoe ends up putting a rock and having it drop in front of him. So Charlotte's like, well, like, that's not gonna do. So she has this shovel and she starts, like, digging her own husband out. So she grabs her husband and is to drag him all the way back to this cabin. And so Defoe is like, well, are you gonna kill me? And Charlotte's like, well, no, like, I have to kind of leave you for the three beggars. So we then whip out some scissors. And so Charlotte cannot stop just going to her own town, let's just say. She cannot just stop not putting some fingers down a certain area. And so she then gets to a point of her needing to take a thing of scissors to herself. And that is to end up getting quite a bit of blood, which then would have at some point, finally, Defoe's character, who is to wake up after asking where is the screw, or where is the wrench part to take off this thing of this weight off of his leg. And Charlotte was to go on and look for it. But yeah, she couldn't find where the wrench was. And so after, Charlotte is to go on and just cut herself and then just be off to the side, just bleeding away. We have Defoe, who is to realize where the wrench is and is to break this piece of wood and is to grasp this wrench and is to unscrew his leg to take this weight from off his leg, and then he goes on to make a splint for his leg and gets the F out of there. Checking on his wife, but realizing, like, okay, she's a lost cause. I'm going to put a splint on my leg, and I'm just going to hobble my way out of here. And so, by the end of this film, we have Defoe, who is in the midst of this woods, and is to all of a sudden have a swarm of faceless women be all around him, to where of which I would have to go on and have to possibly rationalize why that even was a thing. And so here's probably where I'd have to rationalize what the heck that even was. So I'd have to say that maybe that might have been every woman that Defoe might have ever been with. Or maybe that might have just been the women of the woods. Because it seems at one point when Defoe is giving it to Charlotte within this tree, we then all of a sudden see all of these other people within this tree that maybe at some point Defoe had prior relationships with that didn't work out. Maybe, like, there is some other kind of story here that I would just have to put pieces together. Maybe Defoe has had a long stretch of relationships that have eventually had him be the monster to these women. Either way, let me know in the comments below what you are to feel or think upon this film, or how you think the ending was to go on to be. Some other people can go on and have their own feelings. Here's one thing that I will also state, because I forgot about it. So, Willem Dafoe had gone on and done this interview with obviously a interviewer that isn't familiar with Dafoe's body of work, obviously. So, she went on and was to ask Dafoe about this movie, and she, of course, was to state, it's like, well, did you know what you were getting into when you were doing this film? And I'm thinking in my brain, lady, you don't know who Dafoe is. Because this is an actor that has the widest, or the biggest, range of an actor that I've ever seen in my life. Dafoe has gone on to be in Dragona film. He has gone on to do movies like Body of Evidence before even doing this film, which that tells you immediately, yeah, like this guy, this was probably a little bit of a cakewalk. He's gone on to do like so many different kinds of characters. He's been bad guys, good guys, villains, and whichever. Guys with accents. A chameleon of sorts that you wouldn't realize, oh my god, that is Dafoe, until it took you a while. And so on and so forth. So yeah, so with that said, Dafoe goes on and states that it's like, well, yeah, but like, once I was to go on and do this movie, I was to really be like trusting with like so many people, and like Defoe really loved the director and like his vision and what was going on there, and so Defoe just really liked the process of this whole film. And then the interviewer, no clue, but that is to go on and really just be like, hey, when really thinking about it, uh, there is often some times where I am just kind of caught unaware or whatever. And there are interesting times where I'd go on and eventually talk to somebody that would just randomly state some film that I've never even gone on and heard of. And I'm like, oh wow, like that's great. I should go on and definitely check that out. Even though I would probably be not exactly sure if I'm to really go on and be interested about it, but either way, it ends up becoming a review regardless. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here so I can go on and put this out there. Who knows what it will happen with this review? Maybe people will be interested, maybe they won't be. But at the end of the day, either way, I was lucky to be able to put something out. So, bye everybody. Bye everybody.